please text 473. And if you wish to ask a question directly, you might raise your hands. And so we got questions, plenty of questions for everybody. So one question is that throughout the day, we covered most of the interesting areas, but we missed one. And probably I think only the minister can answer that question. Minister, so we covered the whole, all the economic sectors today, but we missed our own city, Suva city. So Suva city, we got an old market, we got an old bus stand. What's going to happen and how Suva city will be beautified by 2025? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. As highlighted in the presentation, we are using the Singaporeans now to look at the master plan for the municipalities. Suva is the capital, no doubt, but also we're looking interested in other capital city, other cities too in Fiji. And well, the issue about the bus stand and the market, it's a very colonial structure. If you look at Fiji, you have the whole notion that each town must have a centralized bus stand and a centralized market. Then everybody, every Saturday, every day comes to the market, buys the vegetables and goes back home, even though the suburbs are all growing. And even though you may see all these illegal roadside vendors that are there. Of course, there's a demand for it. So as you would have seen in the budget about 18 months ago, when we put in the two budgets ago, we put in place additional funding to set up suburban market stalls. But the overall manner in which we deal with our 1,000 cities is to essentially get this urban planning done, and of course they'll be addressed too. Even though we may have a younger population, younger people actually want to travel, can or don't mind traveling distances, the reality is that it increases your carbon footprint. So if you live in Tamavua, you should really have your supermarket there, you should have your market stall there, essentially all the essential services. You should be able to walk to it, or even if you do drive to it, it's actually a very short distance, as opposed to coming all the way to Suva City. So that's what the thinking around it.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Patel, Ashok Patel, the CEO of Fiji, Energy Fiji Limited. Your chair spoke about renewable energy somewhere, but we are yet to see a single solar farm. Do you want to update us?
Thank you. Yeah, we have plans actually to put up 4 solar plants, each of about 5 megawatts in the next 2 to 3 years. The first one is actually started, we have started planning it, and hopefully we should commission the first one by the first half of next year, around May or June next year. Just one more point while answering that question is why solar panels, the prices have gone down. Solar, we need to understand, is intermittent power. So only when the sun is shining, you are able to get the power. So that could be limited to 4 to 5 hours a day. And when it's raining, obviously you'll get nothing. The battery prices have not really come down substantially. If you were to have a fully solar plant with total battery backup, then the price goes more than 100% if you only had the solar panels. So we're still waiting for the prices of the battery to come down, then it will become really effective. But nevertheless, we're still getting onto the solar power plant, and as I said earlier, we've got 4 in the pipeline next to 2 to 3 years, and the first one should come online by middle of next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashmok. Andre, thank you very much for your exciting presentation on Fiji Airways. And we should basically request you to come to Suva very often. We hardly see you in Suva. But the question is, in your presentation you said we need at least 250 rooms every year. So basically you're doubling your passengers within the next few years. The request is, have you communicated this to the government so the government give more priority for hotels? And are we going to see more and more 5 stars in the near future? And you are happy with government's incentive for the hotel sector?
I can only partly answer that. I'll ask the AG to help. Yes, we have communicated it, not only to our minister, but also to the hotel industry. We're currently working with them and sharing information. And we recently had a tourism talanoa where it was also discussed, so there is awareness of it.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt. I mean, you generally get the rep from the hotel industry saying whether there's certain months that are, there's a downtime, the occupancy is not very good. That's where we need to be innovative, and I probably can be a bit more forthright than Andre in that respect. The reality is that many hotels actually don't necessarily partner with Fiji Airways well, and they're very unilateral in their approach. So when the sun is out, they're making hay at everybody's expense, frankly, and they want Fiji Airways to play the ball game. And so, when it's downtime or when the season is low, they expect Fiji Airways to reduce airfares. But when they're doing well, they just jack up the prices without actually any consideration for Fiji Airways. And frankly, I think that's a big disconnectivity there. And frankly, I think a lot of the hotel operators are in a way too independent. Another word for too independent can be perhaps selfish. And I think they need to come together collaboratively. The other issue, of course, is that we need to ensure that as far as incentives are concerned, we believe we have enough incentives for new operators coming into the market to incentivize them. I think many of the operators that have been in the system for quite some time have had a number of good years of actually getting a lot of incentives. As we highlighted about 3-4 years ago, notwithstanding the fact that we had a $1.2 billion industry in the tourism sector, we found we only got about $8 million in corporate taxes because of the various slips and what have you, the incentives that were there. But I think the other point is what you said about are we having enough 5 stars? 5 stars is not the only area we want to be in. And there's also a good market for 3.5 stars, there's a good market for 4 stars. And we need to spread our risk. You're not completely dependent on one skewed perspective of the market. And also I think we need to be able to broaden our tourism sector. There is not even any store in Fiji, a department store tourists can go to where they can buy your brand name stuff. And it's not available in Fiji. So our tourism sector is not matured in that sense. We also don't, of course, have, we are very soft in the MICE market. Meetings, incentives, conventions and exhibitions. We do not have, for example, I remember a few years ago, going to India, and a couple of these companies that actually run your film fair awards, etc., were very keen to come to Fiji, but we don't have a convention center that can host 4,500 people. So we're missing out big time on that. Of course, as you know, the FNPF was interested in that area, and hopefully they'll come up with a convention center large enough, because that's another scope of this segment in the market that we are missing out on. A lot more work to be done, but I think everyone needs to take a collaborative approach.
Thank you, Minister. Governor, in your presentation, you mentioned about productivity levels. And you also said that we can achieve 5% growth if we work hard. What else we can do to increase our productivity?
One thing I always encourage is people to work smart. That's one. Work simple and work smart. I think use of technology. So this thing about using your card, F-post transaction is a simple example. Why do you want to go to the bank and line up? Why do you want to go to the ATM machine? One of the most interesting things that you'll see, and somebody said, is you go to all these supermarkets. Next to the supermarket, there's these ATM machines. People will withdraw from the ATM machine and pay cash at the supermarket when they can pay. So I think we have a very young generation. I think we must use technology more. In our processes in terms of what we can do, and I think that is one area that we can really improve productivity.
Thank you, Governor. Jonathan, you spoke about traffic congestions and road, but it seems the people here also got some ideas for you. So the SUA, traffic congestion, can be reduced without doing much on the road. You need to just start managing traffic and Damodar city. Div is here, as well as if you are asking police to look after the driver behavior in the city. It seems it's not happening. You want to make any comment on
that? Yeah, driver behaviour is bad all over the country. But you talk about Damodar. One of the problems we're facing right now is that people are not following the rules they should be following. A developer develops an area, he needs to get his traffic impact assessment into it so we can account for it in the highway network. If they don't submit their impact assessment, we can't account for the traffic. We have situations all over the country where developers are developing and not following the rules. We can't account for it. So until we get some order and discipline within developers and within the councils, then it'll be the same.
Thank you.
If I can, because this is one of the things I highlighted, and I think if you were talking about 2025, we really need a mind shift, change. I mean, there are many people, for example, if you go and drive between Nandi and Lautoka, a lot of the lands are being developed, a lot of factories being put up, supermarkets, but everybody wants an exemption. They don't have a service lane. So they've got the driveways coming onto on the main highway. Now, we said we were going to put a four-lane road between Nandi and Lautoka. You can imagine the cost to FRA to develop a four-lane road when people already have encroachments. People have got their driveways onto the main highway, so they wash their supermarket and the water all comes onto the road. And then on the other hand, the same people say we want to become like Singapore. See, this is the anomaly. It's an oxymoron, actually. A lot of the business people want to circumvent the laws. They want to bypass the laws. They are the ones who are actually creating corruption too. Corruption works both ways. You have people, for example, from the private sector corrupting government officials. Of course, some government officials are willing to accept the bribe money. So we need to actually significantly change the mindset. We, of course, have to strengthen the laws too. And we have to, of course, remove a lot of discretionary powers that currently exist with certain office holders too. The same way, for example, we've done with immigration. In this country, a few years ago, you had a minister with discretionary powers to give citizenship. So all sorts of people were given citizenship. Now the discretionary powers of the minister has been removed. You actually have to follow and meet a particular criteria, only then you can get the citizenship. So we need to do a similar thing in the various development areas.
Thank you, Minister. So the next question to Chair of Fiji Ports, Mr. Shaheen Ali. You spoke about relocating the port as well as cruise terminal, but it's important globally the cruise market is going up. So your priority to be is cruise terminal or the rest of the relocation of the port?
Minister just whispered both, and I fully agree. Fiji Ports serves a purpose of moving cargo as well as people. Cruise tourism is becoming an important sector in the tourism industry. We see that now Fiji gets around 80 to 90 cruise ships, the port of Suva and port of Lautoka mainly. And that has become an important revenue earner. Now, by diversifying our tourism products, we'll ensure that these cruise passengers spend more. When people come by air, they are greeted by a world-class airport. That's not the case currently with regards to cruise passengers. So we have to establish a world-class cruise terminal. As far as moving cargo, that's our bread and butter. We have to ensure that we keep pace, like I said in my presentation, to the growth in trade that is happening. Trade is growing at a rate of 5% per annum. And pretty soon, there'll be a capacity limitation placed on our old resources. So we need to ensure that we cater for that. We need to think not just 5 to 10 years ahead, but 20 to 30 years ahead, and ensure that we have the capacity for the future growth of trade. And of course, it does follow all modern cities that eventually the cargo operations is taken out and placed somewhere that is out of the city, that it can't cause congestion and other issues. So there should be those plans also in place where cargo operations are taken out. Currently, it occupies a very prime piece of real estate, probably the most valuable real estate in Suva. So it needs to be taken out, and that those properties be utilized for the benefit of all Fijians. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, one question for ANZ and Minister. What are some of the things that government can do to make the banks lend to agriculture sector, especially for the growth of small, medium enterprise?
I will let Minister speak first.
I think two things. Firstly is to make, like I said, agricultural leases longer for 99 years, because obviously you can understand, in particular the mainstream commercial bank not willing to participate in that space because of the fact that they didn't have long-term leases. So this is why you had the National Bank of Fiji, which we lost in the 1990s, was the only bank that used to delve in the area of crop liens. We had crop liens, in particular with sugarcane farming, etc. And we've now, of course, expanded the definition of crop lien. Generally, it was only restricted to sugar. And now, so they could not use the land as collateral. So now they can, because you've got 99-year leases, and hopefully the banks will then be able to get into that space. Because when you get that level of or term of lease, then people who are serious about commercial farming will actually invest. Now, number two, of course, requires a change of attitude by the banks themselves. The banks, whilst they may have not used to lending in the agricultural sector, need to have a mind shift themselves. As they're telling other people to adopt technology, they need to also adopt the agricultural sector themselves. We should not only be completely dependent on FDB. So I think with the long-term leases, there is no excuse really.
It says here, Minister, will government consider risk sharing with banks or use innovative initiatives like ADB have with the Indian banks?
I don't know what ADB has done with the Indian banks,
okay.
But we're definitely open. I mean, we had a meeting with ADB just a few days ago, talking about the new way forward. What are some of the new products we want to look at? And definitely something that we can look to. But again, like I said, that they have actually used, Itoke leases and crown leases or state land leases previously. The banks, as reliable collateral, they should be able to use that now with 99-year lease. So they need to also step up too. They need to also seriously start looking at the agricultural sector, because the reality is that we can do a lot better in the agricultural sector. And of course in Fiji the mindset has also been, if you look at agriculture itself, there's always been sort of small farmer holding approach. We need some large-scale commercial farming. As we've allocated $1 million in this year's agricultural budget, into the area of goat farming, developing actually a goat meat industry, we don't have that. And we're quite willing to partner with one or two producers of goat to actually have proper goat freezing facilities, and also the farming out of rearing of goats, like we do with, for example, the crest and rooster poultry. We should be able to do that with goat meat. So we need to be able to invest that money. We can provide that support. But again, if we set up farms, the commercial bank should be able to come into that space too.
South, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Just as far as the SME goes, especially the risk sharing, there is a scheme by Reserve Bank of Fiji which has been in place for a while now. And that basically means that yes, up to 50% can be claimed back in case of default. As part of ANZ Bank, I'm happy to say that yes, we have the highest portfolio on that in that scheme. Going into agriculture, ever since we have started reporting to New Zealand, and as you know that New Zealand is pretty strong in agro and milk dairy farm. So there are a few people have actually visited Fiji as well. We have actually met some of the industry leaders here, and there will be some plans will be coming out shortly within 6 to 8 months' time, that how we can approach not only the agriculture but also the dairy farming business.
Okay, and while you are there, there's one to you, ANZ. How would you plan to change the mindset of business, irrespective of size, to move to digitization, transactive platform?
I think it's a constant battle, I would say that, because there's still people like to hold on to their checkbooks and their pens. I think, I don't remember when was the last time I wrote more than 2 lines. I normally don't write, but I think for everyone in this room needs to understand that yes, if we do not embrace technology today, we'll be a thing of past. So in technology, it does not come with a cost. There's a one-time cost which you need to invest, and then you can start reaping the benefits out of that. So my request to everyone, and that yes, continue to look forward for the avenues and places where you can actually get into this technology platform. And we as an ANZ Bank We've already rolled out ANZ app for our individual customers, which was the first one in Pacific, and obviously with the transactive, any other the small corporation or the large corporates can get on it and do the digital transformation.
Thank you, Saud. And definitely, as part of our chamber's contribution to the society, we also have invited around 25 young people to be around. So we got 25 people who are under 25 years, millennials. So they are smart. Why they are smart? Because of this question. The question goes to Fazrul. Sir, my name is Sepati. I'm from Carpenter Street. You are scaring us because you said you are going to double total tax collection. Is it because we know the population is not going to grow? Does this mean you are going to tax us a lot when we start earning?
No, I think like that perception that somebody gets scared when we talk about $6 billion in the next 7-8 years, it's not true. The fact of the matter is that our tax to GDP ratio on average is less than 25%, meaning that we are not heavily taxing the economy. So that $6 billion number that I mentioned that we're going to see in the next 7-8 years is because the economy is going to grow. Our effort to improve compliance is going to be intensified, but more importantly, we have a very good set of policy mix. Low rate, broad-based tax. The tax rates are as low as possible, which is going to propel further investments and economic activity. There are formal academic studies out there, and there are real empirical evidence in office that I can present. For example, when tax rates were reduced in 2012, we had seen a revenue growth of up to 12%. And then when same thing happened to VAT as well, there was a remarkable increase in the revenue growth. So I think there's no need to have any fear. We can still get that revenue with the same level of tax rates that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Fazrul. Minister, in your presentation, in one point you were talking about no fees from 1st of January on cards, but you specifically used the word debit card, but we are under the assumption it is debit and credit card.
Yeah, I said actually it's to do with your ATM cards, point of sale. I did not mention credit cards.
Yeah. So no, the question is that, why you said only debit card,
Because
it could have been both.
It's only applicable to that.
Okay, that question is very clear. And I'm sorry, there are a lot of other questions also which I may be feeling not to read much. There is a question about ease of doing business. I think that's been answered several times. And Minister, will there be any improvement in ease of doing business by 2025? We hope yes. But do you want to say any comments, sir?
We mentioned ease of doing business previously. As highlighted, I think the governor had mentioned this, that notwithstanding the supposed decline in the ease of doing business in Fiji, we've seen business activity actually increase in Fiji. We've seen also interest not just by the domestic businesses, but also foreign businesses. Of course, every country has a room to improve. I remember a few years ago when I was in Singapore, you could actually, registration time to register a company, a limited liability company, was 15 minutes. And I said to them, wow, this is great. They said, no, we don't think this is good. It's actually, we want to bring it up to 3 minutes. So obviously there's always room for improvement. In Fiji, it used to take over a year sometimes. Of course, I'm glad to say it no longer takes 1 year. But again, I think ease of doing business is just one indicator. It's not the sole indicator. It again has been very heavily politicized in recent times. Of course, we've seen that in Parliament. And again, I say that, you know, our ability to focus on the future, in particular in economic activity, we need to be very objective about it. I mean, I can go and complain to you about the fact that the ease of doing business, the people who are carrying out the surveys, there's 3 or 4 people all came from one law firm. They don't have a particular proclivity with this government because they no longer get, government work. So I'm sure they have a skewed perspective of ease of doing business. I don't want to labor that point, but my point is that, yes, we want to, of course, improve it. We believe that Digital Fiji will help us achieve that. We are playing catch-up. Yeah. Under the law that has existed for years, you had to have the titles office, all the titles in Fiji secured under a fireproof room. It was actually kept in Suvavu House. The second floor of Suvavo House was sinking because of the weight of the paper. We've now moved it to Civic Towers and moved it on the ground floor so the floor can't sink. This is a very practical issue. We have got now, we're digitizing the titles now that go back to before independence, before colonization, actually. Back to 1874, even a bit before that. Every single document, some of the pieces about this big, you actually have to digitize it all now. So we are doing that now. The moment you get everything down, all the records electronically, then we have to then actually take that forward in terms of online registration, online searches, online changes, online caveats being placed, online removal of caveats being done. All of this is, this significant work. It requires a lot of time. In fact, we've hired university students to just carry out the digitization. We have a special project team. At one stage, they were working 24/7 just to catch up. So that's the enormity of the task. But it needs to be done, of course. But this is something that should have been done 20 years ago, 25 years ago. We're doing it now in the 21st century. But we hopefully will be able to expedite that. And with the help of the Singaporeans, we can get online very quickly.
Okay, one from this side. This is for Energy Fiji. There are certain restrictions in faster adaptation of renewable energy. Is EFL legislation going to change soon to allow residential and commercial solar installations to sell back to the grid?
No, there are no restrictions. I have already about 150 customers, who have solar on their rooftops, and the surplus they're selling to EFL. So anyone who has solar on their rooftops and who wish to sell the excess to EFL, please come and see me. We can talk.
Okay, that's nice and clear. Yep. Can we open the floor for any questions? If there's any, these are from the texting platform.
Yeah.
If there's anything from the floor here, somebody wants to get up and ask?
Please feel free to hands up so we can send a mic to you. But while you're thinking of asking the question, the most number of questions we got is actually for Fiji Road Authority. So I wish they should have a hotline and appoint a public relation officer or something so we can sort things out. Because there's a lot of specific questions which we don't want to say. So it's mostly for Fiji Road. So this is also a question relating to FRA, because the question says FRA claims that we cannot control number of vehicle imports. But in few instances, Minister has clearly said that we are not going to control import of vehicles. Minister, is it true that we are going to continue to do that?
Not control vehicles, you mean? Number of vehicles? Yeah, at this point in time, you control the number of vehicles, if you like, indirectly by the importation rate you have, the duty you have. As you know, a few years ago, we had zero-rated duty on hybrid cars. And now the duty rate is 32%. That's how we do controlling, but also, the reality is that we're a country that only a few years ago, our GDP was $5 billion. Today, it's approximately nearly $12 billion. So a lot more people have access to credit. The governor talked about the fact how the weighted average interest rate was, X percentage, now it's almost halved. So there are people, and this is the example that I've used. Saki, who's my driver, has been driving with me for the past number of years. He's got about 4 or 5 kids. Fantastic driver, fantastic mechanic. Now, he wanted to own his own car. He just finally bought his own car. Now, whenever he gets a day off, he takes his family to Denver for a picnic. He took his family for the first time early this year around Viti Levu. They'd never been around Viti Levu. Why should we deny him the right to access a vehicle? Is it only that the rich should be able to buy that? Is it only the people who already have vehicles that should keep the vehicles? No. The duty is now 32%. But the reality of the matter is that the cost of credit is cheaper, so more people can buy it. Salaries have actually increased. We should not deny him that right. Of course, we have imposed restrictions. For example, If you buy a vehicle over 2,500 cc, if you buy a vehicle over 3,000 cc, you pay 20,000 additional on top of the duty itself. So these people can afford it. We, trying to create a mindset, buy smaller vehicles, we have less carbon footprint, less use less, fuel, etc. So it's a balancing effect. The question that should be asked is this: why are people saying that we should use less vehicles? Now, the most times that people complain about being traffic congestion is peak period. So what they should be asking, how are we going to solve the traffic problem at peak period? We've already said this. We said it in Parliament, we said it outside, that we need to, for example, develop things like bus lanes. We've already got a 4-lane road all the way from Suva to 9 miles. Soon we'll have that completed, the last stretch to Nasuri. Now, we've already said that we'll have dedicated bus lanes. So, for example, we can have a dedicated bus lane from 6 a.m. in the morning to, say, 8:30 a.m. every morning. Left lane only used for buses, nobody else. So, we need people to get on the buses. Now, of course, there are a lot of people in Fiji won't ever get on a bus. They'll catch a bus very happily in Sydney, or catch a ferry or a train, but they dare not do that in Fiji. Because in Fiji it's seen as a, lowering your social status for some people if you get on a bus. Some people don't get on a bus because the quality of the buses aren't good. You have a tarpaulin as a window. So if it rains, they'll get wet. They don't want to get wet. They don't want to take the risk. The number of factors. So we, for example, a few years ago, brought down the duty on buses. We were protecting only one bus-making company. Everybody knows, PLL.
Yeah.
To import a bus at that point in time, your VAT plus your duty and other protections are nearly 50%, correct? Nearly 50% on top of the purchase price. We brought it down to 10%. Last budget, not this one, but the previous one, we announced actually that if you're a bus company that makes $1.5 million or less gross turnover, 0% duty. Go and buy, please, a nice bus from overseas, if you can afford it. Again, with the Reserve Bank, if you're a bus company earning less than $1.5 million or gross turnover less than $1.5 million, your interest rate when you go and borrow money to buy a bus is 5% or less. So you've done all these incentives. Of course, the next stage now is this, not everybody lives on the highway. So if I'm living in Davu Levu inside, right, there's a big area there, I will drive from my house to come to the highway. So I need somewhere to park my car. So as you have in places like Australia, etc., when you go to catch the train, I drive from my home to the railway station. There's parking places available. We need to be able to create parking spaces along this highway for people to drive from their homes, wherever it is, park their car, get on the bus, reach Suva in 10, 20 minutes, less stress, etc. Come back same way, jump in the car and go home. So it's a holistic approach. You can't sort of use this sort of, guns blazing type of approach. And you need to be able to study as well. And that's one of the things we've announced. That's what we're doing in the next 4 or 5 years. In the same way, for example, what Andre highlighted, we gave some seed funding to Fiji Airways to set up an aviation academy. Now, this could have been done yonks ago. But it's strategic thinking. So they will, not spend that $14 million or whatever it is outside the country. They'll do it in country. We'll be getting more customers, builds up the hotel industry. This is where people need to build more hotels in Nandi. Where will these pilots stay when they come? So you see, we need to be able to position ourselves for the future. A lot of the things we are doing now is actually positioning ourselves.
Yep.
Thank you, Minister. I think we're about to wrap up now. But this one for FRA. Road infrastructure, more contracts and works are required to catch up with infrastructure. What does FRA need to accelerate? What does FRA need to accelerate the construction process and increase capacity quicker to cater for the explosive motor vehicle population?
We've got a few things you have to address. There's a shortage of materials right now that we need for the roads. We're looking at new quarry sites all over the country to allow us to get enough materials for the unsealed roads and for the sub-base for the sealed roads. And there's also a shortage of contractors in the country as well. So what we're doing right now is we're working to make sure the contractors get a fair share of the work. They have to tender for the work, but we're trying to make sure that there's availability of work for all the contractors, to make the small contractors into medium-sized contractors and the medium-sized into large contractors. And they're Fijian contractors as well, so emphasis away from a lot of the foreign contractors and trying to introduce more capacity within the local contractors. And there's a huge amount of work to be done out there.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. All right, we'll
Oh, sorry, yeah, depends on how much money we get as well.
Okay, well, I think we should end it here now. We'll, you got one more?
So just final question is to the minister, and why I kept it till the final, because it's not going to be a popular question for the audience. The question is about Gini coefficient. Minister, you said we are reducing the gap between rich and the poor. So which means in the years to come you will be taxing the rich people more?
I don't see the correlation between that. You see, again, this is obsession with taxation, direct taxation. I mean, you need to think outside the box. I mean, the business community in Fiji, frankly, needs to think outside the box. They actually beholden to the old ways of thinking. They're beholden to the, I'm talking generally speaking, of course, they're beholden to the old ways of doing business themselves. I mean, even within the private sector, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities. They need to think outside the box. And as Fazrul highlighted earlier on, that the fact that we've got to grow the economic base by way of, the revenue that FRCS actually collects, does not necessarily mean an increase in the tax percentage. It actually means, it can also mean a further reduction, but just better collection. There are still many tax evaders in Fiji, period. A lot of them don't actually pay taxes. We've now, for example, in this budget, we have said businesses that have $1.25 million gross turnover, less than that, who are in the prescribed list to pay ECAL and STT, no longer will have to pay that. If we were to be penny pinchers, we would have said, no, actually we're losing $16 million, because that's the bottom line for us. We will directly lose $16 million by exempting these people. But we see it differently. We see, okay, them having that, retaining the $16 million themselves and injecting that into the economy, injecting that into their businesses, more money circulating within the economy. So that's the way we view it. And the business community, business houses need to think that way. They're not thinking that way. And I see a huge disconnectivity, to be frank, and I'm very passionate about the subject. I still think there's a huge disconnectivity between the professionals in the businesses and the businesses, between what they're doing now and what they should be doing in the future. I mean, we have this e-ticketing business. We have, bus companies now with e-ticketing. We have some bus companies, when the Vodafone, which is the provider, wanting to do an upgrade of their machines, some of them resisting that. Why would you do that? It does not make sense. So now we're going to have to bring new regulations to actually put a penalty on these bus companies. But if they use their common sense, we wouldn't have to do that. I mean, it's a simple thing like when a kid goes and taps the card on the machine, sometimes they may accidentally tap it twice. So now this software actually will mean that the bus driver can have them redeem that because they've tapped it twice, because they're not traveling twice. Very basic things like this. So, you see, here we've introduced electronic ticketing. Bus companies no longer have to go to the bank to bank the money, no longer have to collect coins. They always complained about that 1/3 of the income was taken away by the bus drivers. None of those problems do exist. But yet, when we've introduced that, then they're resistant to change. In fact, we're having a meeting with the bus operators tomorrow. After on Father's Day, go and meet bus operators at 2 p.m. You see, because the fact of the matter is that we're trying to adopt this. Vodafone has come on board. We're now going to have very soon vending machines. So people can top up vending machines. All of these things are being done. But I do not necessarily see any innovation by the bus operators themselves. In the same way, it's not only about bus operators, it's about all sorts of different sectors in the business. Everybody needs to come on board. Because really, we can actually achieve a lot as a country. We've got a lot of things going for us. The Singaporeans is a great example. They don't necessarily have the same land mass that we do have. They buy their drinking water from Malaysia. We don't have to. We've got a lot of land, a lot of undeveloped land, a lot of potential. We have certain advantages. Yes, we don't have the advantage of having, 300 million people or 1 billion people at our doorstep, but we've got other advantages which we can actually play upon and use it for ourselves. But everybody needs to get onto the same canoe, as they say.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, all right. I think that was very well said, Minister. Thank you so much for that. And I think the whole morning has been worth it. And we've had presentations, excellent presentations, and I want to